I really believe that we are living and experiencing very exciting times because I believe that the need for innovation and change hasn't been greater like for decades now. And what we're experiencing is that things are changing, that we face high volatility. And we also know that those guys here didn't make it the last time big change was around. So we actually don't want to fall into the same trap. So what can we do? Well, basically, we also understand that in order to kind of manage and also master volatile conditions and unknown territory, we need to be quickly adaptive and highly creative. Or we could say, in other words, unpredictable and volatile conditions really favor teams that quickly adapt and are creative at very high speed. So, but how can we do that? Well, around the Agile community and the Agile movement, we've been talking for quite a while now about these questions. How can we become more agile? And to me, two things we've been working on stick out. And one is developing a more agile organization. So with flatter hierarchies, independent teams, new roles, and also implementing what we could call agile methods, all focused on doing smaller steps, having short-term goals towards a longer-term direction, and then iterating our path towards our next short-term objective. However, what really strikes me is that if you think about it, in the end, agile is something that happens in your mind. So we could say in one way, agile actually is a mindset. However, what kind of mindset do we need? What actually is an agile mindset? Well, Mike Rother puts it that way. When conditions are complex and dynamic, scientific thinking may be the best approach we currently have for navigating. So now you could ask, well, but what scientific thinking? Because lots of people, when they hear scientific thinking, they kind of think of a scientist sitting in the laboratory and maybe developing some new theory. Well, actually, what we're looking for to enable people to navigate through unknown territory is more a practical scientific way of thinking. So what does practical scientific thinking mean? Well, here's 4 points I believe are especially important. Number one, for all your efforts, have a long-term direction you're navigating towards, and then break it down and have one short-term focus for the efforts you do. Secondly, understand cause and effect before you implement your ideas. Or in other words, we need to avoid to fall for assumptions and correlations, which unfortunately is what our brain is primed to do. Number three, test every idea. So we should understand that we should test every idea by experiment before we kind of go all in, and then reflect on what happens and adapt accordingly. That is, learn from it. And number four, rather do small, quick steps and not so much a one giant leap. Well, then you could probably ask, well, but I mean, isn't that common sense? What's the problem here? Well, before we talk about what the problem is, I invite you to right now take out a little piece of paper and a pen. So be aware that we have switched on your webcams so I can see if you're really doing it. So please take your pen now, and we're going to run an intelligence test. And with that intelligence test, we're going to kind of determine amongst the audience we have today who is the most intelligent. So basically, this intelligence test contains 4 questions. And I want you to answer these 4 questions. They can all be answered by a number. I want you to answer these 4 questions by giving a range. So for example, we could ask, how far is the distance between Munich and Warsaw? And you could say, well, I believe it's maybe between 1,000 and 2,500 kilometers. So you can give a range. And give a range so that you think you're 98% sure. I mean, there's nothing like 100% sure, but give a rate you think you're pretty sure that matches the answer. And by the way, I know that the range from 0 to infinity answers all questions, but I believe you can do better. Okay, so please write down your answers. Here's question number 1. How many pieces of music did Johann Sebastian Bach compose? Write down your range. You have it? I can see that not everybody's writing. Please write down. All right, here's question number 2. How long is the River Nile? River Nile in Egypt, in kilometers. You have it? Good. Question number 3. Very interesting questions. How many lovers did Katharina the Great, so Russian Caesar, how many lovers did she have? And last question. At what speed is Earth rotating around the sun? All right, so now put your little piece of paper aside. We will check on your answers after the advertisement break. All right, now let's come back to our question. Isn't that common sense, or what is the problem? Well, actually, the problem has to do with the way our brain works. So whenever we are confronted with something new, we could say confronted with unknown territory, we intuitively draw back on our past experience, and based on that experience, make an assumption or prediction about what the future will look like, what that is, what we're facing, and of course, based on this assumption, we also act. So basically, we could say that we're always viewing new things through our window of experience. Well, basically, that is a pretty good survival strategy, because in 95% of the situations that we face every day, it doesn't really make sense to reinvent the wheel. So when we're driving the car, we just react intuitively to what the information we get. However, this has one special precondition, and that is that the circumstances, the experience we're made in, haven't changed. So experience is always circumstance-based. And unfortunately, when making these assumptions or predictions, we are not as logical as we think and maybe would like to be. And that is something that Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman has kind of proven through his research and experiments. And if you're interested in that, I invite you to read his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And in this book and through his experiments, he proves that when we kind of do these assumptions and predictions, we fall victim to several brain biases. So kind of misconnections, misassumptions our brain does. And I just want to mention a few of them today. So the first two I would like to speak about is the confirmation bias and the overconfidence bias. So first of all, let's talk about the confirmation bias and have a look at this sentence here, or these two words. Can you read them? I mean, 50% of the information is missing. So please read them loud. I can't hear you. You have to speak up a bit. All right. So what does it say? Well, it says confirmation bias, right? Isn't that cool? I mean, we only need 50% of the information, and our brain automatically fills in the gaps, and we have the solution, right? See? So that was easy. So we'll go a little bit more difficult here. Check out this one. On this one, more than 50% of the information is missing. And let's see if your brain can still do that. You get it? Read it aloud. Please read it aloud. I can't hear you. You have to speak up here. Okay. Are you sure you can read this, right? Incredible, isn't it? Have a look. Oh no. It doesn't say that. Okay, quickly memorize what is written there. Andy, you have it? Good. All right, let's go back. What was written there? Look on the first word. We know that it's not are you sure, right? We know it's different. What happens when we go back? Your brain tells you it's are you sure, right? So unfortunately, although we have this amazing capability of kind of filling the gaps, that also endangers us, of filling the gaps based on our experience, but with the wrong conclusion. So such is the nature of the confirmation bias. Let's move on. So next I'm going to talk about you probably can already read this, overconfidence bias, right? So let's go back to your little paper with the intelligence test. Please get out your little paper and we'll check the answers you've given. Okay. So did you know? Here's answer number 1. Please check and mark those questions that you've answered correctly. How many pieces of music did Johann Sebastian Bach compose? 1,228. Question number 2. How long is the river Nile? Well, it's 6,853 kilometers. Question 4. How many lovers did Catherine the Great have? Well, it was 40 we know by name, so there might be more. And question number 4. How fast does Earth travel or rotate around the sun? It's around 30 kilometers per second, which is about 108,000 kilometers per hour. So now please check, how many answers did you get correct? And keep in mind, I asked you to give a span, and you were free in choosing the span, where you think you're 98% correct, right? So you had a high level of confidence. And now with the number of answers you have correct now, we can calculate kind of your level of overconfidence. So here's the formula. You can see that. And I'll just give you some examples. So let's say if you have 4 answers correct. So that's 4 divided by 4 means 1 minus 1, 0 multiplied 100% is 0. So you have 0% overconfidence, which would be ideal, right? Or if you had like 2 correct answers, that would be 4 divided by 2 makes 2 minus 1 is 1, multiplied by 100 is 100% overconfidence. And if you had 3, well, that would be 4 divided by 3, which would be 0.3 to the period multiplied by 100 would be around 300%. And I'm very sorry, 0 answers correct. Division by 0 tends to infinity. So what does that mean? Well, basically, when faced with something new and unknown, we tend to kind of go back to the solutions we already know, and we are overconfident that by using these solutions, we will solve the problem. Hence the saying, for somebody with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. For today, I would like to add 2 more biases. There's many more, but just 2 more. And while the first 2 biases, so the confirmation bias and the overconfidence bias, kind of strike us when we think we know, there's 2 more biases that particularly strike when we feel and understand that we don't know. So when we're faced with something new and unknown, and we don't know what to do, the social proof bias kind of forces us to look around, what are the others doing, and we tend to do what we see the others do. Unfortunately, just because more people are doing it, it's not certainly the correct thing to do. And another bias that really hits us when we don't know what to do is the action bias. And that's probably my favorite bias, because that kind of explains why we are so good firefighters. And they found out about this action bias in an experiment or analysis they did on soccer. And they analyzed penalty shots in soccer. And what they found was that how players shoot the penalty shots, that balls or shots are evenly distributed over all regions of the goal. So simplified, you could say about 30% of the penalty shots are shot to the left, 30% are shot to the middle, and 30% are shot to the right. So now from a statistical perspective, what would be the best thing for a goalie to do? Well, basically, it would be to just stay in the middle, right? Because when you stay in the middle and a ball is shot to the middle, you have the highest probability of catching the ball. Whereas if you kind of jump to the left or to the right, it's much more unlikely, even if you have selected the right corner, that you will catch the ball. So then in their analysis, researchers around Ba'ali, an Israeli researcher, analyzed what do goalies do. And interestingly, they found that about in 55% of the cases, goalies dive to the left, and another 50% they dive to the right, and just very seldomly they stay in the middle. That doesn't really make sense from a statistical point of view. So why do they do that? Well, just imagine you were that poor goalie we can see here on the picture, and you face a penalty shot. And because you know statistics, you just stay in the middle. And now the ball kind of, hits in the left side of the goal. And you just stay there and kind of sheepishly stare behind the ball. 60,000 people in the stadium would roar and say, see that dumb goalie, didn't even move. What's he doing? Compared to if, did a power dive into the right corner. And even if it was the wrong corner, people would say, good action, good goalie. I mean, you can't be right every time. So anyways, let's sum it up. So first of all, when we know, we have the natural tendency to kind of draw back on past experience, kind of make premature conclusions, and jump to quick actions. And unfortunately, this is very unapt to master unknown territory and kind of win in the volatile and changing world we're currently facing. So what can we do? Well, something that helps me to kind of find our way out, and it's probably not as difficult as you might think, is the following model, which also comes from the book of Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. So he describes that we kind of have two systems in place in our brain. So one is you could call system one, which is like more on the back part, like the croc brain and the limbic system, which is more kind of in control of our intuitive action. So this part of the brain is very quick, uses low energy, and is also the first one kind of to react when we face something new or get information. And then there's like system two in our brain, which is more the conscious part. And this is more kind of in the front part, the frontal cortex of our brain. And this system is responsible for conscious and thoughtful action. However, as you probably imagine, this is a lot slower and of course uses a lot more energy. So in a way we could say, yes, we kind of theoretically, consciously know that scientific thinking and a step-by-step approach is the right thing to do in changing conditions. However, in our kind of intuitive brain, which is a lot faster, we have that tendency to jump to quick conclusions. And I mean, that is kind of pretty clear why it is that way, because when our ancestors were hunting in the savannah, and just imagine yourself, being in the savannah with your team, and you walk there, and then all of a sudden behind a bush, you hear that kind of strange noise, and the four others in your hunting team start running for the trees. What do? What you won't go for analysis, you just run. So in a way we could say we are all the predecessors of those that whenever something new came up, ran away. Now, what would we need to do to kind of master the world we live in now? Because the savannah is not the world we face anymore. Well, we kind of would need a scientific response pattern. So rather than jumping to quick conclusions, say, wait a minute, let's check on this. So how can we kind of get something that is we consciously know, kind of bring back to make it an intuitive response pattern? Well, the way to do that is through frequent repetitive action. And science shows that this is not achievable by telling people what to do. So basically, we don't change mindset and way of thinking by repeatedly telling people. And even if they rephrase it, it doesn't change. We change the way we think by repeated action. So how can we practice that in organizations? Well, first of all, we would need to have a pattern for practice, because frequent repetitive practice action needs a pattern we repeatedly practice. So what could a model like that be? Well, here's a very simple 4-step model we call the improvement kata. So step one, Before you start action, understand the direction, the challenge you're navigating towards. Number two, before you spin to action, get a fresh view on the facts and the current condition. Don't go for correlation and assumption. Then, because that challenge is far away, break it down, establish a next target condition. And we know there will be many more target conditions until we reach our challenge. And then start experimenting to get towards your next target condition. And that is the four-step model for practical scientific thinking Mike Rother has developed, and we call the improvement kata. And Mike says it's kind of a pattern of thinking that makes us better at reaching difficult goals through unpredictable territory. And I believe that perfectly fits the situation we're currently facing. However, having kind of that rational understanding of that pattern is not enough. We know that we need to practice that. And so probably it would be good, just like in sports, to have a coach that helps us to practice that. And coaching has become more of a trend in organizations. So I would like to dive into that topic of coaching and explain an alternative, a new way of coaching that particularly focus on developing more scientific mindset. So first of all, we understand that when it comes to practicing, frequency matters, because we're trying to override or develop new ways of thinking. So we need to have a frequency, a repetition that kind of overrides or kind of goes over what we currently do. Secondly, the 10-20-70 rule applies. So what's the 10-20-70 rule? Well, people learn 10% from hearing, another 20% from observing others, and we learn 70% from doing it. We know that, but what does that mean? Well, the frequency matters, and we need to do it. We need daily coaching on the job. So what's kind of the challenge with that? Well, coaching should be solution open and precise on the method. So it's not enough to just say, well, I'm coaching, or we're coaching in our organization. So what does that mean? Well, we need to be solution open, because being solution open gives people self-control about their product, their process, what they're working on. And self-control is like the number one precondition for self-motivation. Secondly, being solution open is not enough, because if we just let people do whatever they like, that will be kind of laissez-faire and has a high risk of being arbitrary and ending up with no success. So basically what we need to do is be precise on the method. That's kind of the deal. So be solution open to enable self-motivation, and then coach precisely on the method. Might sound simple, but here's kind of the obstacle or the trick. And I like to see it like this iceberg picture here. So kind of above the waterline is what people or the team develops, what they produce, the content, and of course, resulting from that, the outcome. That is, of course, just based, or will be just as good as the underlying way of working and thinking. So where should the coach focus? Well, the coach's focus should be here. Unfortunately, this is super difficult, because as coaches, we often tend to focus on the content rather than the method. So we use our own experience to challenge our team, to challenge our people, rather than focusing on their method, their way of thinking and reasoning. And in order to kind of practice a coaching for scientific thinking, focusing on the method, I would like to share with you a pattern that can help you to get started. And that pattern is what we call the coaching kata. So the coaching kata is a coaching pattern that consists of 5 questions that focus on coaching for developing a more scientific way of thinking and working together. And here they are. Question number 1, what is your target condition? So that is, like we said, practical scientific thinking. Always have a direction and a short-term focus for your efforts. Question number 2, what is the actual condition now? So let's get fresh facts before we act on assumptions. And especially, what did we learn from taking our last step? So let's reflect. Number 3, before we spin to action now, let's understand what obstacles are preventing us from reaching the target condition and which one are we going to address next. So in the short term, Question number 4, what is therefore our next step or experiment? And what do you expect? So that expectation kind of makes it an experiment compared to a pure trial and error approach. And then question number 4, when can we go and see what we have learned from taking that step? Actually, question number 5 is not so much about agreeing on a due date when we're going to be finished. It's more about setting a next reflection point, closing the feedback loop as quickly as possible so that we can see how the idea we had is actually working in reality. Getting to the end of my presentation today, I would like to share with you 2 options I see how you can use these 5 questions and the pattern of the coaching kata in your daily business. So number 1, when you're interacting one-on-one with people, maybe with a peer, maybe with one of your team members, use the 5 questions, just go through them to problem solve and make sure we are rather using a scientific step-by-step approach instead of jumping to conclusions and falling for correlations. You can carry the card. I'm pretty sure we have the handout, so you can print it out, cut it out, take the card along, and just give it a try. So use the 5 questions whenever you do one-on-one problem-solving interaction. Option 2 for you to get started is more in the team scenario. And in order to use it there, I would like to kind of look behind the 5 questions of the coaching kata, which are actually resembling a 5-step coaching model. So let's have a look. So coaching kata 5-phase coaching model. Phase 1, this is all about establishing the next target condition. So whenever we're in a conversation, whenever we're in a meeting, what we should do first is make sure that we have a common understanding of what we need to achieve next. Phase 2, that is all about getting the facts. Before we go into a heated discussion, let's make sure we have the facts. And secondly, reflect on what did we do last? What did we change? What did we actually learn from that? Number 3, then of course we should understand the obstacle. So what makes the gap between current and target? Pick one to focus on, and then again, understand effect and cause. Based on that, define our experiment and expectation, and then set a quick reflection point. So here is my tip, how you can use this coaching kata 5-phase model in your team interactions. So beside the card, take a little printout of the 5 phases like I show them here. And then when you listen to the team discussing, you will all of a sudden hear or see patterns of discussion. So kind of understand in which phase is the discussion right now. For example, a very common pattern we see in team discussions is this. We talk about the current condition. Oh, we're far behind our target. We're at this and that point. And then immediately people start talking about actions. So we basically jump from phase 2 to phase 4. Here's a remedy for this pattern. What we would actually need to do is kind of from current condition, go back to the target. So you could ask, wait a minute, what's our next target condition? What's our next sprint goal? Maybe in the Agile environment. Then you could say, okay, let's reflect on what we did yesterday or as a last step. What did we change? What did we learn from that? Then what are the obstacles now? Which one will we address? What's effect and cause? And then let's see if the countermeasure you've proposed kind of matches what we just have discussed. Or a second pattern we often see is this. People come up with a problem and again, immediately propose a countermeasure. Again, using the 5 questions, if you see that pattern, you could do the following. First of all, you take them from the obstacle to back to the current condition. Say, hey, wait a minute. If that is an obstacle, how does that affect our current condition? How far are we away from the target? So what is our target condition? Reflect on the last step. So the pattern repeats. What did we learn? What obstacles should we therefore focus on? What's causing them? And then let's see if the action you've proposed kind of matches the cause we've just discussed. And here's a third pattern you will maybe see in your teams, and that is that people immediately come with an action. without even kind of discussing the other stuff. And you probably by now understand how you could handle that. You just go back and say, wait a minute, what's our target condition? Where are we now? What did we learn? And you just walk them with the 5 questions through these 5 phases. So here's my 2 tips for you how to coach for a more scientific way of thinking and acting. Number 1, on your one-on-one interactions, use the 5 questions. In your team interactions, take the coaching kata 5-phase model and try to understand in which phase is the discussion taking place and what should we discuss before we take a decision, and then use some of the 5 questions to take the discussion back. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Back to you, Andy.
Thank you, Tilo. Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions here. I hope that there will be more coming from the audience. You can ask your questions in the room chat inside Gather. That's just a small reminder. So a large part of your talk was about our System 2 and System 1 brains and how they interact. And there is a question, how would this idea of retraining to react differently apply to Agile? Do you mean training in the kata sequence itself? So do you mean training to respond with the kata sequence kind of intuitively?
Okay, well, I'll just share a slide here again for that. All right, so I really enjoy what the Agile community has developed. And I mean, what we see here is that it is now going far beyond the software world. More and more organizations are adapting that. And I believe we should really kind of foster that. So developing an Agile organization, developing and bringing into place Agile methods. And so what I'm talking about is more like a third piece of the puzzle. It's not either or, but how can we within an Agile organization, an Agile method, also develop an Agile mindset? So that, as I said, should ideally happen through coaching on the job. And luckily, we already have the role of the coach inside the Agile concept and setup. So one approach would be to kind of develop with the Agile coaches a kind of coaching model or a coaching approach that, rather than focusing on the content, so as we discussed the iceberg, the top of the iceberg, focus on the bottom of the iceberg, so that within the Agile setup, we could also develop through a very particular way of coaching a more scientific mindset. And because frequency and doing it matters, probably the best way to do that is just in the projects, on the job, so the tasks we do every day.
Okay, so a question that is related to that is how long it takes for the conscious brain to retrain your intuitive brain to react with a different pattern. So when the results of katas will show.
Well, there's different research on that, right? And what I found is that there is not one answer. So for example, in sports, we can say it takes about 10,000 repetitions until a new way of, a new movement becomes intuitive. So probably that's not like the only number, but what we can definitely say is that, first of all, frequency matters. So 15 minutes every day is a lot better than 15 minutes a week or 1 hour every month. And what we can also say is that it really matters to do it hands-on, practically on the job. It's not a rational thing that happens. So it can go kind of quickly. So I mean, remember kind of when you learned driving the car, probably took you like something like 3 months or something like that. It might take in an organization, it might take 2 years till you kind of see that spreading throughout the organization. So I think we have to look on 2 different dimensions here. It's the individual, frequency and good coaching matters, and do it on the job. And then it's the organization. How quickly can we spread it?
Okay, so I have a question here asking for an example. So could you share with us an example of a target condition? It should be from the organization's perspective or the Agile coach's perspective. So
I'm trying to transfer that now to to the more the agile world. And I mean, you as a first step, you could replace target condition with your sprint goal, or with the aspect an individual is working or contributing to the sprint goal. A different perspective on that is in organizations, when it comes to continuous improvement and strategic goals, how we in general set targets. And target condition means that besides defining the outcome, we have also defined the lever or the levers we will focus on to move the outcome. And unfortunately, in many organizations today, target and target deployment only focuses kind of on the outcome measure, on the result. I mean, we want to achieve good results, but we also understand that we cannot directly influence the result, and they're kind of lagging. They're kind of, you know, coming late. Whenever we get the results, all the things we've done are already down the river. So target condition, and that's why I like to write it in 2 words with that little dash between, is defining the outcome we want to achieve, as well as kind of the lever, the condition, what we're going to focus on and need to kind of achieve in the process or in the product.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for another comment. I still welcome questions and comments in together. And another question, any cases when or where you have seen and experienced the improvement kata being used in the context of Scrum and Agile?
Well, what I've seen it is, well, I can't what do you say, disclose the company. But for example, there is 2 companies in Sweden that are really working on, they're very strong on Agile and also very strong on the DevOps development and methods. And they're now working on how can we kind of develop a more powerful way of coaching within these settings. And for that, they're drawing on improvement kata and coaching kata. And from my perspective, and also working with a couple of software companies, this is really a great potential we have. I mean, we have a strong, solid foundation with the Agile methods and the Agile way of organizing things. And we even have the role of the coach, as I said. Unfortunately, what I found in many organizations that run the Agile approach, we tell coaches that they should coach, but nobody really helps them to coach. And there seems to be kind of you could say a potential, something we can still do. And this is where I really appreciate the coaching kata model, because that gives an Agile coach such a good structure. And, you know, the iceberg model is something that strikes us all. Whenever we are kind of interacting with other people and we know we should coach them, but we don't really know how to coach them, we draw back or focus on the content. And we kind of challenge what they propose by our own knowledge, technical knowledge of the content, which is actually not coaching. And this is where I just see a great potential for the coaching kata model based on the improvement kata for scientific thinking within the software world.
Okay, so that plays into like a question. You kind of answered part of that already that I have, which is because kata is basically applying empiricism to improvement, and Agile is applying empiricism to products and development. So those mindsets should kind of be compatible. So is kata easier for Agile practitioners than what you experience in your industrial setting that you worked with previously?
Well, first of all, what I experience is that because we have in the Scrum setting this kind of shorter work focus and the more rapid cycles, that helps tremendously. This is super. On the other hand, we could say just different industries and different also company cultures have different challenges. And one of the challenges I see, especially in development, is that we are very creative on developing the content, but that we kind of find it hard or lack reflecting on how we develop things. So our approach, our method of working. I mean, there's like retrospectives in place. Yes, absolutely. But what do we kind of take from them? Is there like a second level of improvement? So there's developing the product, And then below that, under the waterline, you could say again, is the way of how do we improve the way we develop products. And although we have retrospectives in place, I seldomly see teams that kind of draw patterns from these retro perspectives and kind of make them their separate improvement targets. So like we have targets on the development level where we create the content, we should also have a next target condition on the kind of improvement level where we improve the method, how we develop and work. And that's probably a good next challenge to work towards especially in software organizations and in the development area.
So what I understood from that, like a key takeaway for me, is that frequently teams do focus on the retrospective just on the next improvement or the immediate pain point that surfaced during the last sprint and how to fix it. But what they lack is a longer term target condition, or something that we could call the team vision or way of work vision, just like we have the product vision.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, that is a particular, or that's specific to development projects, because different from an industrial setting where you kind of produce the same product in quite a short time. So you will have the same product tomorrow or in a week. A development project is quite long and runs through different phases. And so the same team will kind of meet the same phase quite a bit later, maybe 2 years later. So this is kind of not really going to work, right? For improvement. However, how can we, within a development area, develop what you said, also a direction for improving the way we work? And
also because what I see is that the teams tend to outlive products. So the teams tend to stay together longer. Therefore, improvement in their way of working will be an interesting investment and valuable for the companies.
And like one of the keys to do that is to start seeing the patterns. And that is also something the coach kind of is part of the role of the coach. It's not so much about telling the team, okay, next time you should do better. It's more about, okay, what just happened to us? Kind of, there was an underlying pattern. And that pattern, maybe we can even already take to the next phase. The content will be different, the phase will be different. But that pattern of working and working together, we can take that to the next phase and improve on it.
Okay, so I have something that is not a question, but is a comment, but maybe you can add something to it. It comes from the audience. This is not a question, just an observation. We can use kata to shift management with capital letters, I hope. Any comment on that?
Well, what we see from that, I mean, there is different roles. And I mean, I see coaching not only as, especially in the development world, I see coaching not only as a hierarchical coaching. Like in the operations, we usually have a hierarchical coaching kind of connection, which is probably also necessary there. However, in the development, there's probably both. In any case, no matter how you put it, coaching for a more scientific mindset is a strong change in the way managers lead. First of all, not focusing on the content anymore. And I mean, we're all strong firefighters, right? Whenever, as soon as a problem occurs, there is no hierarchy levels anymore. Everybody's discussing about solutions. So this is challenge number one. Challenge number two has also to do with the ego, because if you coach under the waterline, so on the way of working and mindset, the solutions that come from that will not be your solutions anymore. So you cannot say this was invented by me, but you can say, it was invented by the people that I worked with and that I helped to develop to a level where they could kind of solve problems and reach challenges they maybe didn't even by themselves think it would be possible.
Okay.
And that's just another way of, kind of incentive. And it's probably not for everybody. It's the question it comes down to is, how do you want to lead your team? Is it about you, or is it about your people achieving
and the result? Yeah. Okay, so I have just last short question. Is your engineering background still useful for you now when you work with coaching, management and stuff like that?
Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
Okay, thanks Tilo. Thank you so much for your talk, and thank you for answering the questions. You intend to log in together and play around for like half an hour, yes?
Yeah, I'll be there for like maybe 20 minutes or something, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you still want to talk to Tilo, you will be able to meet him in Gather. We'll also have a special Slack channel devoted to this talk that you can use to contact Tilo later on, even after the conference itself ends. And now, thanks Tilo for joining us. Thanks for sharing your views and your experience with Improvement Katas.